So in this video we're going to talk a little about composition, and granted in the example we're putting together we'd already decided on the loose composition back here, but this is a case of sometimes needing to see where you're going to then track back and make some adjustments. And for future projects, when you have a good idea of the result you're looking to achieve, you may find this a little easier and you'll have an idea of how to compose things. But this is a good stage to discuss it, and with your own project you're creating, and hopefully you're following along as you're watching the video. This will help you just to tidy up the balancing, and I'll give you a few tips. So for me, this is the version I've arrived at here. Let's make that nice and big so you can see clearly. And at the moment it's loosely shaping up, but it needs a lot of tweaking and fine-tuning. So if you look at this and you think, well, that's perfectly balanced, then that's wrong, and actually there's a good few adjustments we need to make to get this where it needs to be. So first of all, if we look at this secondary tagline, we've got these hyphens between most of the words, but we've missed one here at the end between the brand name and Paris. So I'm going to open up the endpoint a little, and we just want to follow the same pattern and add a space and then a hyphen. And ideally, if we can tie these start and end points together, and we'll just increase the tracking until that's perfectly spaced. There we are. Now, because this is it's a secondary tagline, it's not essential that someone's able to read this. I'm actually going to leave it. I'm not going to look at kerning and tracking between each letter. I think that's sufficient. But what we do want to look at is balancing. Now, there are many different techniques you can use. You can look at using the golden ratio or rule of thirds. You can have everything equally balanced. I like to begin by balancing things optically by eye, and then just make sure it's not off, that anything that's supposed to be centered isn't centered, and follow some basic rules with this. So I'll show you a few techniques as we analyze this now. So let's create a center point that we can work from. Now you could do this as a guide. For me, I'm just going to stroke it. Oh dear, and I've done that with the text selected, so let's go back a few steps. And actually I will just create a guide. That's going to make life much easier. So with that guide, I need to make sure everything that's supposed to be centered lines up to that. Now our M, you'll notice it's got a wider part here than it has. It's not perfectly symmetrical. It's wider on the left and the right hand side. So where it touches the baseline, that's actually not supposed to be dead center of the M. You can see, if I zoom in, can you see the little white dot there? That's actually the center point of the M. So at the moment it's aligned optically, and I think I'm going to keep it this way. If I shift it to be precisely mathematically centered, to me that's quite off, because this is where the eye is drawn to as a central point, and that's significantly off to the left. So I'm going to drag it so it's kind of halfway between the two. I'm also looking at the clear point here on the two sides. Actually, I wouldn't mind that clear point just neatly taking a chunk out of the stroke we've got around the circle there, and I think that's quite a nice touch. It has all of the elements playing with each other and interacting. If you wanted, of course, you could lift this path to the top layer, and that wouldn't be a problem, but I quite like that it breaks the circle in those areas. I think that's quite an effective touch. So the M's centered. Let's just make sure our circle and text are centered. No, shift them just 1 point to the right, and then let's do the M to match. The pattern, well, whether that's centered or not is really up to the effect you're going for. You might have something that's not symmetrical, that's off center, but actually this is a symmetrical pattern, and you can see it's not quite dead center. So let's 12 add open, select it. That's now centered and will come out. Now you may be thinking there's a shortcut for this. You could select all the elements and you could simply hit align center. For me, that's going to throw things off, and it could potentially ruin some of the optical alignment I'm going for. And again, this is just a quick tip. When type isn't outlined, the little, I'm not sure what you would call them, anchor points perhaps, or these little handles, they won't be dead centered because it's sometimes taking the tracking into account. Particularly if we click on the tagline here, you can see the tracking is making the bounding box end significantly to the right of the edge of the text. So you won't be able to trust this to center it. Now if you want, you could outline the text to center it, and actually there's no reason we can't do that now. So I'm going to use Command-Shift-O to outline the text, and now we can trust the guides, and we can have that sit perfectly level with our guidelines. So centering things, I think that's the most common mistake I see in brand identity, that something's not quite centered as it should be, and it just looks awful. It's really an amateur mistake. So definitely use tools at your disposal to make sure everything is precisely centered if it's meant to be. Now with spacing, this is more up to your judgment. And personally, I think if you have spaces that are similar but not equal, I think the eye picks up on that. And I just make some reasonable effort. I'm going to show you a tip here. So I've just created a simple rectangle to fill this space, which optically looks absolutely fine. But I wonder, is that space precisely? I'll have to drop this down and just recolor it. Is it precisely the height of the tagline? And it's not. And I think that would work nicely if it were. So I'm going to align that. And okay, there's a little part that sticks out there. I think it's being hidden at the moment. That's now perfectly aligned to this part of the type. And I want the space. You've got to take care to use shift here, and if you have things snapping, just make sure you can see it trying to jump left and right, so just be really careful and sometimes drag it way off before going back up to make sure you're not being snapped off course. So I'm going to recolor that, which I've just duplicated, and then when I move it into place, that's perfect. And now I know the space between the main brand name and the tagline is exactly the height of the tagline. And then using that same level of spacing, let's drag that up. And this is where, if you do it mechanically, if you do it mathematically, it might not quite look right to the eye, because of course you've got the accent on the E here. So if we did it mathematically, we'd do this, and then again you have exactly the same spacing from the top of the accent to the bottom of our brand mark. To be honest, I think this space should be larger. So I'm going to shift it up one. And using rule of thirds, you don't have to, but it does tend to, to result in something that's more visually pleasing. I'm actually going to draw this from the top of the letters, excluding the accent, and we'll go once, and then again, and that can be 3 times the space. If I colour that, you'll be able to see. So 3 times the gap that we've used between the brand mark and the tagline. If I delete the guides, does it work optically? Well, no, I don't think it does. It looks a little detached. And in fact, in terms of scale, I think the brand mark could stand to be a little larger in comparison to the logo type. So let's put the guides back, and perhaps we'll just have it as double the space. See how that looks. Turn my guides off. That's looking much better. Let's scale it. I'll shift it up a little and make sure everything's constrained in order to scale it, and something around there. As I say, I start off optically, and then I'll try to almost make it fit the nearest mathematical what's the word, unit or boundary. So what I mean by that, to me optically this now looks good. I wonder if this is 2/3 of the width of the logo type. Sometimes you develop an eye in design, and you just end up kind of doing that naturally without meaning to. Your eye naturally finds certain design rules pleasing, but it never hurts to put that to the test. So I've just created 3 blocks. I'm going to line them up, so I'm transforming them all at the same time to the logo type, and then I'm going to remove one, and this basically would be 2/3 of the width of the logo type, and well, it's almost there. It's a hair off, so let's see how it would look if we did enlarge it to make sure it's precisely 2/3. And that's pretty good. That's looking pretty good. I've lost it now, so again I'm just going to draw this. I think we agreed on double the space. I'll select and shift it up again. And these are the kind of finishing touches to the composition that you should be making when you're really pleased with the idea, when you're sure you're going to use it. And in fact, I would recommend skipping ahead to the following video, trying out some of the finishing effects, and then perhaps going to this level of detail with the composition. One final touch, and this isn't really composition, this is more to do with good kerning and good work on the logo type. I'm quite happy with the way this is spaced. I think Trajan Pro 3, straight out of the box, the kerning's really nicely done. But if, for example, let's just isolate this. If you use the font and let's say they hadn't accounted for the O, so there was too much negative space around the O, you know, you would be expected, especially for a branding job, you know, you've got to get this kerning perfect. And there are plenty of videos. If you're not sure what kerning is or how you determine the spacing behind the letters to make sure it's visually equal, well, you can find lots of videos on that from other instructors on Skillshare. So all in all, I think this is looking really nice, and in the next video we're going to show you how to test this out with some finishing effects.